The aroma of coffee woke him before dawn, rich and dark as bottomland soil, curling through the gap beneath his door like an invitation he had not expected but desperately needed. Jack Callahan sat up in the narrow bed of his cabin, squinting through the gray pre-dawn light that filtered through the single window. He had been alone on this patch of Texas land since returning from the war 3 years prior, in 1868, and nobody had ever left anything on his doorstep except the occasional snake seeking warmth or a scorpion looking for shade. The war had stripped him of most things worth having: his youth, his innocence, the easy smile that once came natural as breathing. What remained was a man of 27 who worked his small ranch from sunup to sundown, spoke little, and expected even less from the world. He pulled on his trousers and boots, running a hand through dark hair that needed cutting, and opened the door. The morning air hit him first, cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and mesquite. Then his eyes dropped to the tin cup sitting on the weathered planks of his porch step, steam still rising from the black coffee within. Beside it sat a small cloth-covered basket. Jack crouched down, studying the offering like it might be a trap. His ranch sat 5 miles outside of Redemption, a dusty Texas town that had sprung up after the war to serve the cattlemen and farmers trying to carve new lives from the unforgiving land. He knew his neighbors by sight, if not by name, but none of them had reason to venture out here in the dark hours before dawn. He lifted the cup and took a cautious sip. The coffee hit his tongue like liquid revelation, strong and smooth with just a hint of something he could not quite name, cinnamon maybe, or cardamom. It was the kind of coffee that made a man remember there were still good things in the world worth waking up for. He pulled back the cloth on the basket to find fresh biscuits, still warm, with a small jar of honey tucked beside them. Jack stood slowly, scanning the landscape. His cabin sat on a low rise, giving him a clear view in all directions. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon in shades of orange and gold. He saw nothing, no rider, no wagon, no sign of whoever had left this gift. Just the endless roll of Texas prairie, dotted with mesquite and live oak, stretching away to meet the sky. He carried the cup and basket inside, set them on the rough-hewn table he had built with his own hands, and tried to make sense of it. The coffee was too good to waste, so he drank it slowly, savoring each swallow, and ate 2 of the biscuits with honey that tasted like sunshine. Then he went about his morning routine, feeding the horses, checking the cattle in the near pasture, mending a section of fence that had sagged in the night. But his mind kept circling back to that cup of coffee, that basket of biscuits, and the mystery of who had left them. The next morning, it happened again. Jack woke to the same rich aroma, opened his door to find another steaming cup and another basket. This time there were cornmeal johnny cakes and a small portion of bacon, cooked crispy the way he liked it, though he had told no one his preferences. He stood on his porch in the chill morning air, cup warming his calloused hands, and called out into the empty land. "I appreciate the kindness, whoever you are. Would be pleased to thank you proper." Only silence answered him, broken by the distant cry of a hawk circling high overhead. Jack waited, watching, but saw nothing. He drank the coffee, ate the food, and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought dead and buried, curiosity maybe, or hope, or something more dangerous than either. On the 3rd morning, Jack woke before the coffee arrived. He dressed quietly in the dark, positioned himself at the window, and waited. The stars were still bright overhead when he saw her, a slender figure moving through the darkness with the confidence of someone who knew the land well. She wore a simple dress and carried a basket over one arm. Her hair hung in a long braid down her back, though he could not make out the color in the darkness. She moved up to his porch, set down the cup and basket with gentle care, then turned to leave. Jack should have opened the door right then, should have called out to her, but something held him back. He watched her walk away, following the path back toward town on foot, and wondered what kind of woman walked 5 miles alone in the dark just to leave coffee for a stranger. He gave her a head start, then saddled his horse and followed at a distance, keeping far enough back that she would not hear his approach. The sun was rising now, painting the world in shades of pink and gold, and he could see her more clearly. She was young, probably early 20s, with auburn hair that caught the morning light. She walked with purpose, not hurried but steady, like she had somewhere to be and knew exactly how to get there. She led him straight to redemption, to a small house on the eastern edge of town that looked like it had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged on one side, and the garden out front was more weeds than vegetables. She went inside without looking back, and Jack sat on his horse at the end of the street, watching until the door closed behind her. He rode into town proper, tied his horse outside the general store, and went inside. Ezra Thornton stood behind the counter, sorting through a shipment of canned goods. Ezra was a broad man in his 50s who had run the store for as long as Jack had known the town. "Morning, Jack," Ezra said, looking up with mild surprise. Jack rarely came to town except for supplies, and he had stocked up just last week. "What can I do for you?" "The house on the eastern edge," Jack said without preamble. "Small place, needs some work. Who lives there?" Ezra's expression shifted, something sad moving across his weathered face. "That would be Clara Bridgewater. She moved here about 6 months back, just before winter set in, keeps to herself mostly, does laundry and mending for folks to make ends meet. She alone there, far as I know. There was talk when she first arrived, young woman traveling by herself, no husband, no family. But she has been nothing but proper and hardworking, so most folks leave her be." Ezra paused, studying Jack with interest. "Why do you ask?" Jack shook his head. "No reason. Just noticed the place needed some repairs." He bought a few things he did not really need, coffee and sugar, and a new whetstone for sharpening his knives, then rode back to his ranch. But his mind stayed on Clara Bridgewater, on the way she had walked through the darkness to bring him coffee, on the care she had taken to make sure it was still hot when he found it. He wondered what would make a woman do such a thing, and more importantly, he wondered if she would do it again. The fourth morning, Jack was waiting on his porch when she arrived. He had lit the lamp inside so warm light spilled through the window, and he sat on the step with his rifle across his knees, not because he expected trouble, but because a man living alone learned to be cautious. He heard her footsteps before he saw her, the soft crunch of boots on the hard-packed earth. Then she emerged from the darkness, basket over her arm, and froze when she saw him sitting there. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Up close, Jack could see that she was beautiful in a quiet way, with green eyes that seemed to hold secrets and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She wore that same simple dress, faded blue calico, and her braid hung over one shoulder. "Morning," Jack said quietly, making no move to stand or reach for the rifle. "Been meaning to meet the person who makes coffee good enough to wake the dead." Clara Bridgewater stood very still, like a deer deciding whether to bolt or hold her ground, her hands tightened on the basket handle. "I apologize if I disturbed you. I only meant to," she trailed off, seeming unsure how to finish. "You did not disturb me," Jack said. "Truth is, it has been the best part of my days this week, but walking out here alone in the dark is not safe. There are coyotes and sometimes worse. I can take care of myself." "I do not doubt it, but I would rest easier if you let me ride into town and escort you out here proper in daylight if you have a mind to keep visiting." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or relief. "I should not impose on your time, Clara." Her name felt right on his tongue, like he had been waiting to say it. Anyone who makes coffee like that does not just leave it on the step and disappear. They stay for a while, share it. She looked at him for a long moment, and Jack saw something shift in those green eyes, a wall lowering just slightly. "You know my name. Asked around yesterday. Hope that does not trouble you." "No," she said it softly, then took a step closer to the porch. "I should tell you I am not what people in town think I am. I did not come here running from a scandal or a bad marriage. I came because I needed a fresh start, and redemption seemed as good a place as any." We all need fresh starts, Jack said. He stood slowly, setting the rifle against the porch rail and gestured to the door. Come inside. Let me make you some coffee for a change, and you can tell me why you have been walking 5 miles in the dark to feed a stranger. Clara hesitated, then nodded. She followed him into the cabin, and Jack saw her taking it all in with quick glances. The neat simplicity of the single room, the bed in one corner, the table and chairs he had made himself, the small stove where he cooked his meals. It was not much, but it was clean and orderly, and he felt oddly proud of it under her gaze. He built up the fire in the stove and set water to boil while Clara unpacked her basket. This morning she had brought eggs and bread, and without asking she began cooking breakfast for both of them, moving around his small kitchen like she belonged there. Jack watched her, fascinated by the economical grace of her movements, the way her hands worked with quiet competence. I saw you in town about 2 weeks ago, Clara said as she cracked eggs into his skillet. You were loading supplies onto your horse and you looked so tired, not just body tired, but soul tired, if that makes sense. I thought about you after you left, wondered what would make a man look that weary, and I felt like maybe I understood because I have felt that way too. Jack said nothing, just listened, letting her words settle into the quiet spaces of the cabin. I started baking more than I needed, Clara continued. Told myself it was practice, that I was trying to improve my skills. But really, I kept thinking about you out here alone, and I wondered if anyone was taking care of you. Then one morning I woke up early and just started walking. I told myself I would only do it once, but then I saw the empty cup on your porch the next day when I walked past on my way to town, and it made me happy to think you had enjoyed it, so I came back. She plated the eggs and bread, set them on the table, and finally looked at him directly. I know it was forward of me, I know it probably seems strange, but I wanted to do something kind for someone and you seemed like you needed it. Jack sat down across from her, studying her face in the lamplight. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why me? There are plenty of folks in town who could use kindness. Clara looked down at her plate. Because you were alone like me. Because when I looked at you, I saw someone who understood what it is like to wake up every morning and have to convince yourself there is a reason to keep going. And I thought maybe if I could do something small to make your days a little easier, it might make mine easier too. The honesty in her words hit Jack like a fist to the chest. He had spent 3 years trying to convince himself he was fine with solitude, that he preferred the silence of his ranch to the noise and complications of human connection. But sitting here with Clara, sharing a simple breakfast as the sun rose outside his window, he felt something crack open inside him, some frozen place beginning to thaw. Thank you, he said quietly. For the coffee, for the food, for the company, and for being honest with me. They ate in comfortable silence, and when they finished, Jack insisted on riding her back to town. Clara accepted, and they rode together through the brightening morning, her sitting behind him on his horse with her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. He could feel the warmth of her against his back, could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair, and something in him that had been clenched tight for years began to relax. When they reached her small house, Jack helped her down and found himself reluctant to let go of her hand. Would you mind if I came by tomorrow? I noticed your porch needs fixing and I am handy with a hammer. Clara smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the sadness that seemed to live in her eyes. I would like that. Jack rode back to his ranch with that smile burned into his memory. And for the first time since the war ended, he went about his work whistling. True to his word, Jack rode into town the next morning with his tools strapped to his saddle. Clara was hanging laundry in her backyard when he arrived, and she greeted him with that same soft smile that made his heart do strange things in his chest. He spent the day working on her porch, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing the support posts, while Clara brought him water and sandwiches and sat on the steps talking to him while he worked. She told him about her life before redemption, how she had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Her parents had died of fever when she was 19, leaving her alone with debts she could not pay. She had sold everything, packed what little remained, and headed west looking for a place where nobody knew her story, where she could build something new. "I thought about going all the way to California," she said, watching him work. "But I ran out of money in redemption and decided maybe that was a sign. So I found this house, cheap because nobody else wanted it, and I have been trying to make it home ever since." Jack paused in his hammering, looking over at her. "Does it feel like home yet?" "It is starting to," she said softly, and the way she looked at him made clear she was not just talking about the house. Over the following weeks, Jack found excuses to come to town more often. He fixed Clara's sagging fence, patched holes in her roof, built her a proper woodshed so she would not have to keep her firewood stacked against the house where it drew termites. In return, she cooked meals for him, mended his shirts where they had torn, and filled his days with conversation that ranged from serious to silly and back again. The people of Redemption noticed, of course. Small towns noticed everything, and a confirmed bachelor like Jack Callahan suddenly spending time with the mysterious Clara Bridgewater was prime gossip material. But Jack found he did not care what people said. For the first time in years, he felt alive, felt like there was a reason to wake up beyond simple survival. One evening in late April, as they sat on Clara's newly repaired porch watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Clara asked him about the war. Jack had been waiting for the question, knowing it would come eventually, and he found himself answering with an honesty he had not managed with anyone else. "I enlisted in '64, he said quietly. "Thought it was the right thing to do, defending the Union, preserving the country. I believed in the cause, I still do, but war is not about causes when you are in the middle of it. It is about surviving one more day, watching friends die, doing things you never imagined yourself capable of." Clara reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to." "I want to," Jack said, surprised to find it was true. "I have not talked about it with anyone since I came back. Felt like nobody would understand, or maybe I was afraid that talking about it would make it more real. But with you, it feels different. You do not look at me like I am broken." "You are not broken," Clara said firmly. "You are healing. There is a difference." They sat in silence as the light faded, hands clasped together, and Jack felt something settle in his chest. Some burden he had been carrying alone finally shared. When full dark came, he reluctantly stood to leave, but Clara stood with him, and before he could think better of it, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Clara was smiling up at him with tears shining in her eyes. "I was hoping you would do that eventually. Only took me a month to work up the courage," Jack said with a rueful grin. "Some things are worth waiting for," Clara said and kissed him again. From that night on, they were courting officially, though anyone with eyes could have seen it coming for weeks. Jack spent his days working his ranch and his evenings in town with Clara, and slowly the weariness that had haunted him for so long began to fade. He laughed more, smiled easier, felt the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders. Clara bloomed too, the sadness in her eyes giving way to genuine happiness. She still did laundry and mending for the townspeople, but now she talked about other dreams, maybe opening a bakery someday or a small restaurant where she could cook for people who appreciated good food. Jack encouraged every dream, storing them away in his heart like precious things. In May, a drought hit the region hard. The spring rains that usually greened up the prairie never came, and the grass turned brown and brittle under the relentless sun. Jack spent long days hauling water from the creek to his livestock, watching his small herd with worried eyes. Other ranchers in the area were already talking about selling off cattle before they lost too much weight, maybe even abandoning their claims and heading somewhere with more reliable rainfall. Jack came to town one evening exhausted and discouraged, and found Clara waiting for him with cold lemonade and a meal of fried chicken and potatoes. They ate in her small kitchen, and afterward Clara led him out to the porch where the evening breeze provided some relief from the heat. "Tell me the truth," she said. "How bad is it?" Jack did not want to worry her, but he had promised himself he would always be honest. "Bad enough. If we do not get rain soon, I will have to make some hard choices. Might have to sell off most of the herd, maybe even lease out the land and find work elsewhere to get through the next year." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, "If it comes to that, we will figure it out together." Jack looked at her sharply. "Clara, I cannot ask you to tie yourself to a failing ranch. You are not asking, I am offering." She met his gaze steadily. "Jack, I know we have not talked about the future in specific terms, but I think we both know where this is heading. And when two people are building a life together, they face the hard times together too." Jack felt his throat tighten. He reached out and pulled Clara into his arms, holding her close while the evening darkened around them. "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it before now, but I love you more than I thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Clara whispered against his chest. "We are going to be all right, Jack. Whatever comes, we will face it together." 2 days later, the rains came. Not a gentle spring shower, but a full-blown thunderstorm that rolled across the prairie like a miracle, soaking the parched earth and filling the creeks and stock tanks. Jack stood on his porch watching the rain come down, and for the first time in his life, he cried tears of pure relief and gratitude. The rain broke the drought, and the grass greened up almost overnight. Jack's cattle fattened on the fresh grazing, and he knew he would make it through another year. But more than that, he knew he wanted Clara by his side for all the years to come. On a warm evening in June, Jack rode into town with a ring in his pocket, a simple gold band he had purchased from a jeweler in the larger town of Abilene, 30 miles north. He found Clara in her garden, pulling weeds in the fading light, and when she looked up and saw his face, she set down her trowel and stood slowly. "Clara Bridgewater," Jack said, taking her hands in his. "I know I do not have much to offer. A small ranch, a simple life, hard work and uncertain futures. But I can promise you this. I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I will work to make you happy, to build something good with you, to be the kind of man worthy of the gift you gave me that morning with the coffee." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me?" Clara was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, that radiant smile that had chased away the darkness in both their lives. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Jack stood and kissed her, and the few neighbors who were outside cheered and applauded. News spread through Redemption fast, and by the next morning, the whole town knew that Jack Callahan and Clara Bridgewater were getting married. They set the date for August, giving Clara time to make herself a proper dress and Jack time to fix up his cabin for a wife. He added a room onto the small structure, expanding it with a sitting area and a real kitchen, and he built Clara a large garden plot behind the house with a fence to keep out the deer and rabbits. He also bought a cow for fresh milk, chickens for eggs, and a pig to fatten for winter meat. Clara continued working in town until a week before the wedding, saving every penny she earned to buy supplies for their household. The women of Redemption, who had been slow to warm to the mysterious newcomer, finally embraced her fully, helping her sew her dress, sharing recipes and household tips, treating her like one of their own. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in the small church that served Redemption and the surrounding ranches. Clara wore a dress of cream-colored linen with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers Jack had picked that morning. Jack wore his best suit, bought for the occasion, and when Clara walked down the aisle toward him, he felt his heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed Clara with all the love and promise he could pour into that single gesture. They celebrated afterward with a meal at the town hall, where the community had gathered to share food and music and dancing. Jack waltzed Clara around the floor until they were both dizzy and laughing, and then they slipped away to begin their life together. The ride back to the ranch took them through the twilight, the sky painted in shades of lavender and gold. Clara sat beside Jack on the wagon seat, her hand in his, and they talked about their plans for the future, the cattle they would raise, the crops they might plant, the children they hoped to have someday. When they reached the cabin, Jack carried Clara over the threshold, and she laughed with delight at the tradition. He set her down gently in the middle of their home now, not just his, and they stood holding each other in the lamplight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Jack said softly. "It feels right," Clara said, looking around at the rooms he had built for her, the furniture he had crafted, the small touches she had already added during her visits. "It feels like this is exactly where I am supposed to be." That night they lay together in the bed Jack had built wider to accommodate two, and Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about the first morning," she said, "what you thought when you found the coffee." Jack smiled in the darkness, his hand stroking her hair. "I thought someone had made a mistake. Could not imagine why anyone would do something kind for me without wanting anything in return. But then I tasted that coffee and I thought, whoever made this understands what good things should taste like. They understand care and attention and craft, and I wanted to know that person." "And now you do," Clara said softly. "Now I do," Jack agreed. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life deserving you." "You already deserve me," Clara said. "We deserve each other. We both came through hard times, both survived when it would have been easier to give up, and we found each other because we were both still trying, still hoping." "That is not luck, Jack. That is earned." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and when Jack woke in the morning, his first thought was not of the work that needed doing or the weight of the past. It was of gratitude that Clara was beside him, that they had found each other against all odds, and that every morning from now on, he would wake to the miracle of her presence. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as all marriages are, but Jack and Clara navigated it with patience and humor. They learned each other's rhythms, the small quirks and habits that make up a shared life. Clara learned that Jack woke at dawn no matter what and could not function without coffee. Jack learned that Clara sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs, and that the sound of her voice made even the hardest chores feel lighter. They worked the ranch together, Clara proving herself as capable with livestock as she was in the kitchen. She learned to ride well, to rope a calf, to recognize when a cow was ailing and needed attention. Jack taught her everything he knew, and in return, she taught him to see the beauty in the land he had been taking for granted, to notice the wildflowers that bloomed after rain, the way the sunset painted the clouds, the small perfect moments that made life worth living. As autumn arrived, they worked together to prepare for winter, cutting firewood, preserving food from the garden, making sure the livestock had shelter from the cold winds that would soon blow down from the north. Clara turned the small room Jack had added into a proper living space with curtains she sewed herself, a braided rug she made from fabric scraps, and pictures she drew and framed of the prairie landscape she was coming to love. In October, Clara realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell Jack until she was certain, then shared the news one evening after dinner as they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear. Jack's reaction was everything she had hoped for, pure joy mixed with protective concern, and he immediately started planning all the things he needed to do before the baby arrived. A proper cradle, more storage for baby clothes, perhaps another room addition to give the child space to grow. "Jack," Clara said, laughing, "we have months yet. Slow down." "I want everything to be perfect," Jack said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I want our child to have everything I did not: stability, safety, parents who love each other and love them." "They will have all that," Clara assured him. "But what they will need most is you, just as you are." Winter came hard that year, with ice storms and bitter cold that kept them close to the cabin for days at a time. But Jack and Clara did not mind. They had each other, warm fires, and plenty of food stored away. Jack read to Clara from books they borrowed from the town library, and Clara knitted small garments for the baby coming in spring. They played cards and checkers, told each other stories from their childhoods, made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside on Christmas Eve. They invited Ezra Thornton and Pastor Williams to share dinner with them, the two men who had been kindest to them both. They ate roast chicken and potatoes, dried apple pie and fresh bread, and afterward sang carols while snow fell softly outside the windows. Jack looked around at the scene, at his wife glowing with pregnancy, at the simple warmth of friendship and community, and felt wealthy beyond measure. "This time last year I was alone," he said to Clara that night as they prepared for bed. "I thought I would always be alone, and now look at us, married, expecting a child, building a life I never imagined possible. All because I left coffee on your step," Clara said with a smile. "Best coffee I ever tasted," Jack said, pulling her close. "Worth waking up for every single day." The baby came in April, during a thunderstorm that reminded them both of the rain that had saved Jack's ranch. Clara labored through the night with the help of Mrs. Patterson, the midwife from town, while Jack paced and worried and generally tried to stay out of the way. When dawn came, so did their son, a healthy boy with strong lungs and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Jack's father who had died when Jack was young, and Thomas, after Clara's father. Samuel Thomas Callahan made his presence known immediately, demanding food and attention with the imperious attitude of a king, and Jack fell completely in love within seconds of holding him. "Look what we made," Jack whispered, staring down at his son's tiny, perfect face. "Clara, look what we made together." Clara, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him from the bed. "He is beautiful, he is perfect." "He is ours," Jack said, and the wonder in his voice brought tears to Clara's eyes. Parenthood transformed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Jack, who had been so serious and reserved when Clara first met him, became playful and silly with his son, making funny faces and singing nonsensical songs to make Samuel smile. Clara, who had carried such sadness when she arrived in redemption, bloomed into confident joy, secure in her role as mother and wife. They worked the ranch around Samuel's schedule, taking turns so one of them was always with the baby. As Samuel grew, he became their constant companion, riding in a sling on Clara's back while she tended the garden, napping in a basket in the shade while Jack worked with the cattle, learning the rhythms of ranch life before he could even walk. The drought that had threatened Jack's livelihood the year before seemed a distant memory. The rains came regular, the grass grew thick and green, and the cattle herd grew steadily. Jack was able to hire help during roundup and branding, a young man named Miguel who had drifted up from Mexico looking for work and proved himself reliable and skilled. By Samuel's first birthday, the ranch was prosperous enough that Jack and Clara could think about expansion. They bought additional land from a neighbor who was retiring, extending their range and their possibilities. They built a proper barn to replace the small shed Jack had been using, with room for horses and equipment and hay storage. Clara started keeping bees, harvesting honey that she sold in town along with the surplus vegetables from her ever-expanding garden. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right: work and rest, struggle and reward, the small daily joys of family and purpose. Jack sometimes thought back to that morning when he first found Clara's coffee on his step and marveled at how one small act of kindness had changed everything. He told her so often, usually late at night when they lay together in the darkness, Samuel asleep in his cradle nearby. "You saved my life," he would say. "I was just going through the motions before you came along. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive." "You saved mine too," Clara would reply. "I thought I was beyond reach, beyond love. You proved me wrong." When Samuel was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and fatigue, and Jack worried constantly. But Clara reassured him with her steady strength, and in February of 1872 she gave birth to twin daughters, Emma Rose and Sarah Grace. The twins were smaller than Samuel had been but healthy, and they looked like miniature versions of Clara, with her auburn hair and delicate features. Jack was overwhelmed by the reality of 3 children under 3, but Miguel's wife Rosa came to help, and between the 2 women they managed the chaos of the expanding household. Jack built another addition onto the cabin, creating separate bedrooms for the children as they grew. The small cabin he had lived in alone was becoming a proper house, rooms sprawling out to accommodate the family that filled it with noise and love and life. He also built a larger kitchen for Clara, with a real cook stove and plenty of counter space, and a root cellar for storing preserved food through the winter. The ranch continued to prosper. Jack's reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled cattleman spread through the region, and he was able to command good prices for his beef. He invested the profits back into the land, buying more breeding stock, improving his facilities, building the kind of operation that could support his growing family and perhaps someday be passed down to his children. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who wanted to help with everything, following his father around and asking endless questions. The twins were different from each other despite being identical in appearance, Emma bold and adventurous, Sarah gentle and thoughtful. Jack loved them all with a fierceness that sometimes surprised him, would have died for any of them without hesitation. When the children were young, Clara told them the story of how their parents met, how she had walked through the darkness to leave coffee for a lonely cowboy, and how that small act of kindness had grown into the family they had become. The children loved the story, asked for it again and again, and Jack never tired of hearing Clara tell it. "Your mama saw something in me I had stopped seeing in myself," he would add when Clara finished. "She reminded me that life is worth living, that love is worth the risk." Everything good we have came from her courage that morning. "Not just my courage," Clara would say, smiling at him across the table. "Your courage, too, for opening the door, for letting me in." As the children grew, they became more involved in ranch life. Samuel learned to ride at 4, fearless on the gentle mare Jack bought specifically for him. The twins followed suit, and soon all 3 children were competent riders, helping move cattle, check fences, and do the countless small tasks that kept a ranch running. Jack taught them to work hard, to treat animals with respect, to value honesty and integrity above all else. Clara taught them other lessons, reading and arithmetic at the kitchen table, music and art, and the importance of beauty in everyday life. She taught Emma and Sarah to cook and sew, but also to think for themselves, to speak their minds, to be strong, independent women. She taught Samuel to be gentle as well as strong, to value emotion and expression, to grow into the kind of man who could love openly and without shame. The years passed in the way years do when life is good, fast, and slow at once, each day full but looking back feeling like time slipped through their fingers. Jack and Clara grew older, laugh lines forming around their eyes, Clara's hair showing strands of silver, Jack's shoulders broadening with the work of the ranch. But they still looked at each other the way they had in those early days, with love and desire and deep appreciation. In 1878, when Samuel was 7 and the twins were 5, a severe winter hit Texas. Snow fell heavy and stayed on the ground for weeks, and temperatures dropped to levels rarely seen in that part of the state. The cattle struggled, and despite Jack's best efforts to provide hay and shelter, he lost a significant portion of his herd to the cold and lack of forage. It was a devastating blow financially, wiping out years of careful growth. Jack sat at the kitchen table one night after the children were asleep, going over the numbers with Clara, trying to figure out how they would recover. "We will have to tighten our belts," he said heavily. "Maybe sell off some of the land I bought, scale back the operation. I hate to do it, hate to lose ground, but I do not see another way." Clara studied the figures, then looked up at him. What about my honey and garden produce? I have been selling small amounts in town, but what if I expanded? I could sell at the farmer's market in Abilene, maybe even negotiate with the general stores in surrounding towns. It would not replace the cattle income, but it might help us get through until the herd rebuilds. Jack wanted to say no, wanted to tell her he should be able to provide for his family without his wife having to work. But he had learned over the years to respect Clara's strength and intelligence, to trust her judgment. You really think you could make enough to matter? I do, Clara said firmly. I am good at this, Jack. You know I am. Let me help. Let me do my part. So Clara expanded her garden operation, planting every inch of available space, setting up more beehives, even starting a small orchard of fruit trees that would produce in years to come. She spent hours preserving vegetables, making jams and jellies, bottling honey in decorative jars. And she took her products to market every week, driving the wagon herself when Jack was busy with ranch work. To Jack's amazement and pride, Clara's business thrived. The quality of her products was exceptional, and word spread quickly. She gained regular customers who sought her out specifically, and shopkeepers in 3 different towns began carrying her goods. The income she brought in that year kept them afloat, while Jack carefully rebuilt his cattle herd with breeding stock purchased at rock-bottom prices from ranchers who were giving up and leaving. By the following spring, they were stable again, and by summer, they were prosperous once more. But the experience taught them both valuable lessons about resilience and partnership, about not being too proud to accept help, about the strength that comes from facing challenges together. In 1880, the railroad finally came through redemption, transforming the sleepy town into a real shipping center for cattle and produce. Jack and Clara seized the opportunity, Jack negotiating contracts to supply beef to markets as far away as Kansas City and Chicago, Clara expanding her operation to provide preserved foods to the dining cars and station restaurants along the line. Their success allowed them to make improvements they had only dreamed of. Jack built a proper ranch house, large and solid, with indoor plumbing and a parlor for entertaining. Clara got the spacious kitchen she had always wanted, with plenty of room for her preserving work. They added a bunkhouse for the 3 full-time hands they now employed year-round, and a separate building for Clara's kitchen garden and preserving operation. The children flourished. Samuel, now 12, was his father's shadow, learning everything about ranching and showing a natural talent for working with cattle. Emma discovered a passion for horses, breeding and training them with skill that surprised even Jack. Sarah preferred the quieter work of her mother's garden and kitchen, showing an artistic talent in how she decorated Clara's products and designed displays for market. Life was good, better than either Jack or Clara had imagined possible in those early days when they were both struggling alone. But they never forgot where they came from, never took their blessings for granted. Every year on the anniversary of that first morning, Jack woke to find fresh coffee on his bedside table, Clara's gift to remind him of how they began. And every year, he pulled her close and said the same thing he had said that first morning when she finally stayed for breakfast. Anyone who makes coffee like that stays. Forever. In 1882, tragedy struck when Ezra Thornton died suddenly of a heart attack. Jack and Clara mourned deeply, remembering the kindness the older man had shown them both when they were new to redemption and finding their way. At the funeral, they learned that Ezra had left his store to his nephew, but the nephew had no interest in running it and planned to sell to the highest bidder. Jack and Clara talked long into the night, discussing possibilities, weighing options. The next morning, they made an offer on the store. It was a stretch financially, requiring them to leverage some of the ranch, but they both felt it was right. Ezra had been a friend when they needed one, and they could honor his memory by keeping his store alive and thriving. They purchased the store and put Miguel's wife Rosa in charge of running it. Rosa proved to be a natural businesswoman, expanding inventory, improving customer service, and turning the general store into the heart of the community. Clara used the store as a home base for her garden and honey business, and soon they were shipping products all over Texas and beyond. Samuel graduated from the small school in Redemption at 14 and announced he had no interest in further education. He wanted to work the ranch full-time with his father. Jack was proud but also worried, wanting his son to have opportunities he had not had. But Clara reminded him that Samuel knew his own mind, that loving the land and choosing to work it was as valid as any other path. The twins continued their education, Emma studying veterinary techniques through correspondence courses, becoming the closest thing to a horse doctor the region had. Sarah developed her artistic talents, creating botanical illustrations of Texas wildflowers that she sold to catalogs and magazines back east, making a name for herself while still helping with the family businesses. In 1885, Samuel married a young woman named Lucia Hernandez, the daughter of a rancher from the next county. The wedding was a grand affair that brought together families from across the region, and Jack and Clara hosted it on their ranch, proud to share their home and their son's happiness with the community. A year later, Samuel and Lucia gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named Jack after his grandfather. Holding his namesake in his arms, Jack felt the circle complete, felt the legacy of love and hard work extending into the future. He looked up to find Clara watching him, tears in her eyes, and he knew she felt it too, the miracle of what they had built together. Emma married a few years later to a man who shared her passion for horses, and they established a breeding operation on land adjacent to the family ranch. Sarah surprised everyone by deciding to attend art school in New York City, the first member of either family to venture so far from home. Jack and Clara supported her decision, though they missed her terribly, proud of her courage to pursue her dreams. As the years passed and their children built lives of their own, Jack and Clara found themselves with more time together, not less occupied but less urgently needed for the moment-to-moment work of raising children. They took long rides together across the ranch, revisiting the places that had marked important moments in their shared life. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set, talking about the future and remembering the past. You ever think about that morning? Jack asked one evening in 1890 as they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. About what would have happened if you had not left that coffee. I think about it often, Clara said. I think about how close I came to not doing it, how I stood in my kitchen that morning arguing with myself about whether it was too forward, too strange. I almost talked myself out of it a dozen times. I am grateful you did not, Jack said quietly. I am grateful for your courage, for your kindness, for every choice you made that brought you to me. It was not just me, Clara said. You had courage too, Jack. You let me in. You opened your heart after it had been closed so long. That takes more bravery than walking through the dark. They sat in comfortable silence, and Jack thought about the journey they had taken together, from those first tentative moments to this solid, unshakable love that had become the foundation of their lives. He thought about his children and grandchildren, about the legacy they were building, about how one small act of kindness had rippled out to affect so many lives. In 1892, Jack and Clara decided to host a harvest celebration on their ranch, inviting the entire community to share in their abundance. It had been a good year, excellent weather, strong cattle prices, Clara's garden and honey business more successful than ever. They wanted to give back, to share their blessings with the neighbors and friends who had supported them over the years. The celebration was magnificent, tables groaning under the weight of food, music and dancing lasting long into the night, children running wild while adults caught up and told stories. Jack stood on his porch watching the scene, Clara beside him, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This is what we built, Clara said softly, echoing his thoughts. Not just the ranch or the businesses, but this community connection, love spreading out from what we started. All because you made good coffee, Jack said with a smile. Clara laughed and elbowed him gently. It was good coffee, was it not? The best, Jack agreed. Though I have to admit it is not the coffee I fell in love with. No, it was the heart behind it, the generosity, the courage to reach out to someone you did not know and try to make their life better. That is what I fell in love with, that first morning and every morning since. As they grew older, Jack and Clara remained active in the ranch and businesses, though they gradually turned over more responsibility to Samuel and Emma. They took time to travel, visiting Sarah in New York where her art career had flourished, journeying to California to see the ocean, taking a train to Colorado to see the mountains. But they always came home to their ranch in Texas, to the land where they had built their life together. In 1895, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with all 3 children, their spouses, and 6 grandchildren gathered around their table. Jack looked at the faces of his family, at the love and laughter that filled his home, and struggled to find words for the gratitude he felt. Clara squeezed his hand under the table, understanding as she always did. After dinner, when the children were occupied elsewhere, she led him out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. 30 years, Jack said wonderingly. Some days it feels like forever, and some days it feels like no time at all. I know what you mean, Clara said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Do you remember what you said that first morning after I finally came inside? I said a lot of things that morning. You said anyone who makes coffee like that stays. Clara looked up at him, her face soft in the twilight. And I did stay. I stayed and built a life with you, and it has been the greatest adventure of my existence. Mine too, Jack said, pulling her close. My greatest adventure, my greatest joy, my greatest love. You are all of that and more, Clara. They renewed their vows that night, standing on their porch under the stars with Pastor Williams, now elderly but still serving the community, officiating. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, and Jack and Clara promised each other again what they had promised 30 years before, to love and honor, through good times and bad, for as long as they both lived. The new century arrived, bringing changes to the world around them, but not to the core of who they were. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management. Emma's horse breeding operation became known across the Southwest, and Clara's preserved foods were now sold in stores throughout Texas and into neighboring states. Sarah returned from New York with a husband and a baby daughter, settling on the ranch to raise her family while continuing her art career. Jack and Clara became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing clan. Their wisdom sought, their opinions valued, their love the bedrock on which 3 generations now stood. They still took their morning coffee together, though now they sat in comfortable chairs on an expanded porch, watching the sun rise over land that stretched as far as the eye could see. You remember being afraid? Clara asked one morning as they sipped coffee and watched their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Back at the beginning, when everything was uncertain, I remember being terrified, Jack admitted. Terrified of hoping, of wanting something so much it could hurt me. I had convinced myself it was safer to be alone. And now I know that love is always worth the risk. The pain of losing you someday when one of us goes first will be nothing compared to the joy of having loved you all these years. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Clara reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the easy familiarity of decades together. I will make you a promise, Jack Callahan. Whichever one of us goes first, we will wait for the other. And when we meet again, I will have coffee ready, the best coffee you ever tasted. I will hold you to that, Jack said, blinking back tears. As it happened, Jack was the first to go in the spring of 1908 at the age of 67. He died peacefully in his sleep after a day of riding the ranch he loved, and his last words to Clara were the same as his first, that the coffee was the best he had ever tasted and she should stay forever. Clara mourned him deeply, but not desperately. She knew they had been blessed beyond measure, had lived a love story that most people only dreamed of. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the living legacy of the love she and Jack had shared. She died 5 years later in 1913, at the age of 66. The night before she passed, she told her family the story one more time, of how she had walked through the darkness to leave coffee for a lonely cowboy, and how he had said the words that changed both their lives forever. "Anyone who makes coffee like that stays." They buried her next to Jack on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue and wide, it seemed to go on forever. And though they were gone, their love remained, in the land they had tended, in the family they had raised, in the community they had built, in the simple truth that one small act of kindness can change everything. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Samuel to his children and grandchildren, a living testament to what Jack and Clara had built together. And every morning, somewhere on that land, someone made coffee, good strong coffee brewed with care and attention, and remembered the story of how a lonely cowboy and a brave young woman found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would outlast them both. The coffee was always the best anyone had ever tasted, because it was made with love, and love was the secret ingredient that made everything worthwhile. It was the lesson Jack and Clara had taught by example, that reaching out to someone in kindness, opening your heart despite fear, choosing love even when it would be easier to stay closed off, those were the choices that made life worth living. Years later, when Samuel was an old man himself, sitting on the porch of the ranch house with his own grandchildren gathered around, they asked him what his parents had been like, really like, beyond the stories they had heard. Samuel thought for a long moment, remembering. "They were ordinary people who chose to be extraordinary in their love for each other," he finally said. "My father was a man who had been hurt by life, who had closed himself off from hope. And my mother was a woman who understood loneliness, who knew what it was like to feel invisible and forgotten. But they saw each other, really saw each other, and they chose to build something together. They chose love every single day in small ways and large, until it became the most natural thing in the world." He paused, looking out over the land his parents had loved. The thing people do not always understand about love stories is that they are not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. They are about showing up, day after day, choosing to care for someone, to work beside them, to face life together. "My mother walked 5 miles in the dark to leave coffee for a stranger because she wanted to do something kind. My father invited her to stay because he recognized that kindness and wanted more of it in his life. Everything else grew from that simple beginning." One of the great-grandchildren, a girl of about 10, asked, "But how did they know it would work out?" "How did they know they were making the right choice?" Samuel smiled. "They did not know. That is the secret, Clara," he said, speaking to his great-granddaughter who had been named after her great-grandmother. "They did not know if it would work. They just knew that trying was better than not trying, that reaching out was better than staying isolated, that love, even with all its risks, was worth pursuing. And they were right." The Callahan Ranch thrived into the modern era, adapting as times changed but maintaining the core values Jack and Clara had established: hard work, integrity, generosity, and above all, love. The general store in Redemption, still bearing Ezra Thornton's name, remained a family business, now run by Emma's descendants. Clara's garden and honey operation evolved into a successful organic farm, her original recipes still used, her commitment to quality still honored. But beyond the businesses and the land, the real legacy Jack and Clara left was the family itself. Generations of Callahans who grew up hearing the story of how their ancestors met, who understood that love was a choice and a commitment, who knew that one person's courage to reach out could change everything. In the old ranch house, now preserved as part of the family compound, there hung a painting Sarah had done late in her life, showing a young woman walking through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying a basket. The painting was titled The Coffee, and it had become a family treasure, a reminder of where they all came from. On special occasions when the whole family gathered, someone would always make coffee using Clara's original method, the recipe passed down through the years. And as they drank it, they would remember Jack and Clara, the lonely cowboy and the brave young woman who found each other in the Texas wilderness and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The story of Jack and Clara Callahan became legend in Redemption and the surrounding region, told and retold as an example of how love could transform lives. Young couples visited their graves on the hill, leaving wildflowers and asking for blessings on their own relationships. The coffee shop that eventually opened in Redemption was named Clara's Cup, serving coffee made according to her original recipe, and it became a place where people gathered to connect, to share stories, to build community. Because that was what Jack and Clara's story was really about, not just two people falling in love, but the way love radiates outward, touching everyone it encounters, creating ripples that spread farther than anyone could imagine. One act of kindness, one cup of coffee left on a doorstep, had grown into something immeasurable, beautiful beyond words. As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in the same golds and oranges Jack and Clara had watched together for so many years, their great-great-grandchildren played in the yard where their own children had once played. The ranch stretched away in all directions, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to vision and hard work and love. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after this life, Jack and Clara sat together on a porch overlooking endless prairie under infinite stars, holding hands and sipping coffee that was always hot, always perfect, always the best they had ever tasted. Because they had earned their happily ever after, earned it through courage and kindness and the simple daily choice to love each other well. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a promise kept. The cowboy had noticed she left fresh coffee on his step. He had said, "Anyone who makes coffee like that stays." And she had stayed, not just for a day or a year, but forever, in the land they had loved, in the family they had raised, in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and remembered that love, real love, begins with a single act of courage and grows through a lifetime of choosing each other, again and again and again.